Hello everyone, I am John Salmon and we're here with the next installment of our Reflections, a Cuong Nhu history program. Tonight we're going to be talking with Robert First and Elizabeth Roman. And of course also here is Mark Brandenburg, the wizard behind the curtain who makes all of this happen. The four of us here tonight is different. It's a special relationship. Both Mark and I are products of your line. As you know, I was away from Cuong Nhu for 20 years to come back and start with my senseis, Billy and Patty Ceccarini, who started their training with you. Mark started his training at Shuhari with you. So both of you have certainly been instrumental in our Cuong Nhu advancement and our lives in Cuong Nhu, for which you have our gratitude. Most important is, by staying involved, we have become not only friends, but family as well. This Reflections project was started several years ago by Mark and I to record the memories of those who were here when O-Sensei first came from Vietnam to the University of Florida. The two of you represent a later generation of masters who had significant contact with O-Sensei, but after his return from Vietnam. Thank you in advance for sharing your reflections, your recollections with us. Before we get started, let's talk about a little bit about each of you. You're both Shichidan, 7th degree. Between the two of you, you have founded 5 dojos, hosted 14 IATC training camps, have progeny across the pond in Europe. Pretty good. Pretty good. Robert, you began training in 1980 with O-Sensei and Grandmaster Quinn.
I have to correct you there.
Gainesville.
1981.
You moved to Boston, 1984, founded the Boston Dojo. At a training camp sometime around then, you reconnected with Elizabeth, fell in love, and followed her back to Florida. You were married in 1987. Elizabeth lived in Dallas, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, West Virginia, South Florida, went to the University of Florida, FAU, University of South Florida.
She got around.
She got around, yeah. But she stuck with you since 1987. That's pretty good. In your non-Cuong Nhu life, which by the way you don't have, because according to an email I sent you in advance, I asked both of you what you do outside of Cuong Nhu, and your joint answer was nothing. But we know better. Robert, you've been a stockbroker, an entrepreneur, you've owned a health club, you're a software engineer. Elizabeth, software application developer, a Java programmer, and apparently quite the bicyclist.
At one time.
At one time, okay?
So you were not exactly incorrect about when you thought he started, because until very recently, we thought he started in 1980.
Well, that's what was in the Dragon News. So
Yeah.
I had a conversation. I was talking with Quinn, and I said, someone asked about, I mentioned it, about his black belt testing date. That was the first time I ever saw Cuong Nhu. I went to watch a friend test, and Quinn's black belt was that day. And I just meant it, and I said, yeah, well, you took your black belt in 1979. And he said, no, I took it in December of 80. I said, what? And my whole idea of when I started was, I started in the spring right after that, December. So that jumped it a year. And so Elizabeth had started earlier that year. Mm-hmm. So all the times that I tested, because O-Sensei wanted me to test because I had the one that started first.
Was this at the center?
Yes.
In Gainesville?
Yes. So that was a misplaced date. But I fessed up to it the second I found out.
Yes, you did.
Yes, I did.
And then we had to change history. And I started in January 1981 at UF, and I was going to go play co-ed soccer with my friends. And there was a University of Florida Cypress School poster on the door as we went out of one of the of the dorms, Hume Hall, And so I said, hey, let's go try this, because it's something I had wanted to do since I was young. I grew up watching Kung Fu and Kwai Chang Caine, and thought it would be something to be able to have the strength of the martial arts and a good philosophy to be as calm as he was. And so I saw the sign and I said, let's do this. And my friend said, we're going to go play soccer. I said, okay, I'll see you later. I bowed into the class at Cypress School in the University of Florida Women's Gym and never left.
Can you grab pebbles from somebody's hand?
I'm working on it. Still working on it.
For
But,
those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, YouTube it. Go ahead.
So my first, let me just finish, sorry.
Just don't draw too big a hand.
So my first instructor was Joe Montague, was a 1 green stripe, and the head of the school was Master Mary Davis. Looking ahead of me, Master Allison Appin. So, you know, it was a pretty exciting time. And it was something that really I enjoyed. And then the first time I saw Sensei, I knew Cuong Nhu was for me, because the way he spoke with the philosophy and the way that his demeanor was and the way he worked us out was just something that I had always looked for, and I felt that I found it.
Robert, you?
Oh, I went by.
What drew you in?
Well, after we went to the testing, and, you know, saw my friend test and Quinn test, we went back in to check it out. We checked out a couple schools there, Wadukai, basically those 2 schools.
And that was your brother that checked it out with you, right?
Yeah, my brother Joe and me were checking it out, and we went to the center dojo and saw the sensei teaching a class. And well, he didn't go with me to Wadukai. I went by myself to Wadukai, and they were just out there teaching class. It was good looking, but when we went to Cuong Nhu, sensei was teaching the class, and he was like really being intense, and you really like firing in, and you could like see spit flying from his head. He's like, and my brother was like, "Geez, this guy's crazy." And I was like, "Yeah, we're going here, man." So I went to join up, and Sensei actually was the first person that signed me up.
But not right away.
Yeah, he told me I had to wait because the beginner's class wasn't open yet. And I said, you know, come on, man. And he said, you know, you have to wait for the beginner's class to open in the spring. Ooh, I might have started before you maybe if you'd let me join. And he...
Funny how that works out.
And I said, well, man, I just go down to that other place, Wadukai. And he said, oh, that's a good school. You'll like it there. I didn't even want me to come here. But I came back.
Ah, you both started separate classes?
I was at Cypress
She was
School.
at Cypress. I was at
All
the
right,
center.
so I'm going to ask a question I've asked some of the others, because we used to have names for classes. Do you remember the names of your classes?
Absolutely, Shojin.
And?
The first class of the Center Dojo didn't have a name. We never had a name.
And we made T-shirts, and it was the transcendence from the past to the future. So that was the 1 green stripe class. And the wonderful thing about it was, and by the way, when he said we, it wasn't we. We weren't a we yet for like 5 more years. And so...
Far from a we.
Yeah, pretty far from a we. So I'm scrolling through here because we had taken some notes to keep things straight. But at Cypress School, there were many instructors that we would have throughout, or at least I would have throughout my stay there. And there were the 3 classes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday there. And then I did classes at the center, and then I did classes on Sundays.
She was a dojo rat.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I did about 8 classes a week, which, you know how that goes for studying. And so I traveled to different schools, and the really cool thing is right from the beginning, one of the greatest things I believe O-sensei cultivated within Cuong Nhu was family. And so a friend of mine and I, who were training together at that time, we went over to Beaches Cuong Nhu, and I think we were 1 or 2 green stripes, and stayed with, he set it up so we could stay with one of his students because we went to train there. And so from the get-go, it was this place of opening the door, and anywhere you wanted to go train, you were always welcome. And so I actually have a prop. When we went to South Florida regional event, we had traveled down from Gainesville. Sensei gave me a book.
She was always getting awards from Sensei.
So the ideals of the samurai.
She was his pet.
And so it said, and this is back when I was called Liz
To
Roman.
Liz.
Awards to Liz Roman, Cuong Nhu Campout 83 from No Dong. Oh, okay, so it wasn't a regional event, it was training camp. And so,
Which I didn't get invited to.
so it was always encouraging for with all the different instructors I was able to work out with. And
Back then, you had to be invited to training camp.
yeah. But you would go into the center dojo, and I'd walk in, and you know, here I am, maybe. So I started when I was 18. I might have been 19, and Quinn be laying on the couch, and he must have been.
Always eating Taco Bell.
So how old was he? He's 3 years younger, so he was about 16, and he'd be like, "Hey, let me tell you about life." And I'm thinking, and he'd talk all about blah 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 blah, and I'm thinking, him tell me about life? I'm 19. I know all about life. And so it was really quite an interesting time because here we are. We were all very young in the dojo, and we worked out really hard. And any dojo you went to, and there was camaraderie, and there was excitement.
Very
and,
competitive, though.
yeah, and so it was great workouts, and anything that you did, Sensei, if you asked Sensei a question after class about a tambo or something, next thing you know, you'd have to remind him an hour and a half
You had to be
later.
careful, man.
I had to go study, and
And
they're like, go, 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 go.
Working out there 11 o'clock at night.
You two never worked out on Florida Field, right?
I did,
Yeah,
Cypress
she did.
School. Yep.
Yep.
And we did workouts up and down the field where the football players were running all around. And then we ran the stadium stairs.
Yeah, Quinn and I used to sit on the couch. You'd come in about 4 o'clock, or 4:30. Class was 5:30, I think.
On had to be 12?
No, 2 was like 12.
Did she call you Robert first or Robert first?
No, they all called me Robert First. That was it.
And why was that?
Because that's what they thought my name was. On Robert First. Quinn Robert First. I was Robert First. My brother was Joe First. Joe First. And so I guess we can talk about that. I didn't know they didn't know. So for my showdown certificate, he called me and we went to the center. I was doing something, and he called me from the office, and he said, "Robert First, come here." So I go running up, and I said, "Yes, Sensei." And he's like, "Doing your showdown certificate. Where you from? Where were you born?" I said, "Miami." Gave him the date or something, and then he just said, "So, what's your last name?" I said, "It's First." And he looked at me. He started to write, and he stopped and looked up at me and went, "Your name is Robert First?" I said, "What?" I said, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "Oh, no, my name is Robert First."
And you were Shodan at this point.
I was getting my
That's the first
Shodan.
time you would get a certificate.
He was giving me my certificate. And I remember he just stopped and he giggled. And he wrote it down.
Let's rewind. Black belt tests. We've asked all of the people being interviewed about their black belt tests and any when, where, how long, how many senseis, how many push-ups, any remembrances of your black belt test?
You should go first because mine was really interesting.
Well, I had...
I mean, not that his wasn't, but you'll see why.
And were you an item at this point when you both had your black belt test? Yeah.
Well, her test, yes, we were an item.
Okay.
My test, no.
Okay.
No, she wasn't on the official radar. But I was training for, at the center, and Sensei didn't have a lot of trust in me. I wasn't a trustful person, so that's not hard to believe. And I had my black stripe. Didn't have 2 black stripes back then. And so I guess I'll test black belt pretty soon. But the invitation never came. In fact, a couple other people were testing that, kind of behind me. But so because of what was going on in my life, I went to Boston and disappeared. And I was training in Boston by myself. No one knew where I went. And I wrote Sensei a letter. I look back on it as first and only time I ever asked Sensei about my rank, black belt or above. And I wrote him a letter that said, I've been working out in Boston. I'd like to come down and test my black belt. It's funny. I have so many things I've saved over the life, but that letter escapes me. It's gone. And he wrote me back, and in the letter, he basically just said, you left the center. You have left from working underneath my tutelage, and you believe you can come back to the center after a year and just test your black belt? please do. That's what he said. So I was like, okay, I'm going. So I came down and worked out with him for a week. And in that week, he was very quick to point out that I was not the same person that left. And, you know, he could read people very well. And he knew that you know, I had changed. I got my life transformed. That's why I took the test. And I had the panel up there, you know. They weren't masters yet, but, you know, Master Mary Davis and Master Lopp and, well, those are the main, you know, Frank, it was a whole panel. And probably the funniest part of the test, well, the funniest part of the test was before the test, and I was, you know, getting ready, I'm walking around, I'm really getting nervous, and I started walking out towards the front of the dojo, and I'm like, oh man, I've been training a long time for this. All I gotta do is one workout, I'm a black belt. And I smiled. And Master Mary came in the front door of the center, and she looked at me and she goes, Robert, first, aren't you taking your black belt today? And I looked at her and I said, yes, I am. And she said, wipe that smile off your face. And it's funny because the quote she's famous for was like, keep that smile on your face.
But not if you're testing black belt.
Not if you're testing black belt. So the test went off, and probably the most memorable moment on the test, besides the fact that we did fighting form 7 times.
Really?
But you also discovered that they go, oh, you did it forward and backwards. I mean, reverse, whatever you call it, mirror. Well, anyone that really worked it out knew that it was easier to do mirror than forward because you get to launch with your good leg. But during the test, we're there, and they wanted us to, they just had us lined up, and they said, to roll across the floor. So, I was all psyched up. I trained in Boston. I was like, I was pretty hardcore at the time. I was ready to go. So they go, okay, everybody, forward rolls across the floor, the wood floor. So I just dove. I got airborne, came out of the roll, jumped up. I could see myself in the mirror, and no one else had gone. I was like, oh. But they were just hesitant because it was the wood floor. So I was right, but I was just standing out there. And so that was pretty cool because,
Anybody still around who tested in your black belt class?
No.
All right, your test, Elizabeth.
So Robert and I got together in 1986 or 85. One of the
We're not
two.
holding anybody to dates in this interview.
So-
we're good.
So the reason why that was important was I was training in White Crane. And
Who was the sensei?
Sensei
Eddie Wax. And so, the students there were really supportive and helpful because, I had just come. I had moved away from Gainesville as a brown belt, and then...
it was a very strong school at that time.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was
Yep.
really kicking.
And so I found out that...
At the JCC.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
All right.
So I had gone to a testing in Gainesville, and I found out Luis Silva was there. And so I found out he lived in Boca, which is where I was living. So I started to work out with Luis Silva. And then Robert and I got together. And then, over a period of time, Luis Silva actually named the school via
Geraldo Rodriguez.
Geraldo Rodriguez. He had found the name, and it was fantastic.
Okay, that's a little funny in itself because, we're starting the school. We're going to name the school because we took it over because Luis
Was
left.
leaving.
He was leaving. And all of a sudden, we're like working out, and Luis comes up and says, oh, I found the name for your school. We're like, oh, you did, huh? It's our school. And then he tells us his name, and he shows us what it means. And we're both like, wow,
Very cool.
That's pretty cool.
Is that
Suhari.
Suhari?
It was
Suhari.
Suhari. Yep.
And what does it mean for those who don't know?
Very similar to Shojin. It means the transitions from the past to the future. Things are always moving and ebbing, and
You're bound by tradition, but you have no boundaries.
Interesting.
and there was one kata that O-sensei did at one of their training camps that he called Suhari kata.
The Boca Raton training camp, Suhari Kata is when you have no moves, you have no preconceived, you didn't practice a kata. You did whatever came to you as you were there.
As you see your opponents.
And we did that on the stage.
As we just, since you brought that up, and we will get to training camp, was that the training camp where Master Lopp did Tiger and they became the
Masters?
No, that was a year later.
It was a year later, but I think that was in Boca as well.
Yeah, when
Well,
the
actually,
Masters.
I'm sorry. That training camp the Sensei did the kata was in Miami, at
Right.
Barry University, and the first training camp we ever hosted. And we'll do a little. We will what do they call that? Digress there for a moment. We were at the Boston training camp, and at the black belt meeting, it was all done. And at the end of the black belt meeting, somebody said, "Sensei, where's training camp next year?" And Sensei said, "We don't have one yet." So you know, he was scanning across the room. Stopped right on me. And he goes, "Robert Fellows, can you have training camp in Miami?" And I looked at him. I go, "Sure, Sensei, yes." And he looked at me, he looked back across the room, he goes, So, Robert Fellows, you have no idea how you're going to do this, do you? I said, no, I don't, Sensei, I don't have any idea. And he slams his hands together and he goes, that is a leader. I say, do training camp. And he says, yes, Sensei, and he has no idea how to do it.
And that was your first?
Yeah, that was our first training camp.
How many people at that training camp?
At that one, I'm not sure, but the year after, I'm positive about the number, because that was the year that everyone got their Rakudans, and O-Sensei became Grand Master, and that was 454.
And that was the one in Boca.
That was in Boca.
All right. Did you have anything else before we move on?
So we never got finished through the black belt test. So he and I got together about 1985.
And we trained like maniacs.
Yeah, and so because it was the two of us, it's not that, well, I didn't trust either of our abilities to get me to black belt. Because what had happened was I had tested my one black stripe test, I guess, in December 1985. And then at the end of it, they said, we want to give you the challenge of going for black belt in August 1986. And so we said, okay.
And since I was the guy that had run the big bad school in Boston, I had my own school. You know, it was like, well, I can do this. And I said, I'll help you train. And she was like, yeah, you might help me train, but we'll do this together. Cause
So I would have a schedule, and everything was planned for 7 days a week. We sparred every day.
Precision, passion.
It was at FAU, and we would spar out in the middle of this.
There's this little island in a lake, and we didn't have anywhere to spar, so we went out there. It was so cool. It was barely big enough for us to be on. We were out there sparring in the middle of a little island.
And I was so worried we would not cover everything that I had to make sure everything was covered every week. And if he would have to convince me to take one day off. And then, of course, Robert would look at the schedule and say, okay, we're going to tweak it today. We need to do this based on what we've done before.
We worked out on these pool decks. We, concrete, pool decks. We didn't have anywhere to work out. So.
Outside, in the heat, in South Florida.
Yeah.
Yep. And so then we would go see O-Sensei. And then, you had asked in the interview questions, you had said, what are some of the lessons you've learned? Well, one of the big lessons that I always make sure I tell people, and I kind of laugh about it because I pass the story on, was, we got to the point where about 4 or 5 months before the test, I was hitting each technique I was going to break with 25 to 50 times each technique.
It's crazy. It was crazy.
We didn't know what we were doing. We were scared we weren't going to get it done.
We just couldn't do enough reps.
By the time the test was there, it was 100 times each technique hitting the bag for the breaks. And so we go up to see O-Sensei at one of the seminars, and O-Sensei said, so, how are her breaks coming?
Yeah, don't ever do that, man.
And he goes, and Robert's like,
no problem.
and O-Sensei
Don't have me overconfident.
okay.
Sounds like 500 more reps.
Exactly.
Right.
And it was to the point where, the lack of confidence in what we were doing, I did every kata backwards and forwards. And if you would say, okay, bow in, do jute, I wouldn't remember which leg
It got hard to
start
remember
with.
which way it really started. We did it so much in each direction.
So it was like overtraining. So August 1986, my test was in Gainesville, Florida. Master Mary gave the test. And it was actually quite a wonderful month for me. It was very exciting because in that month, I got my black belt test, graduated from FAU, got into graduate school so that we could be on campus, became faculty, and got my diving certification. It was like this, boom. But of all of that, I have to say it was the black belt test that was probably the most rewarding and meant the most to me.
And she looked real good, right? And it was kind of funny because for some reason I got all the credit for her. Everyone's like, wow, she looks great. Wow. And I'm like,
Of
well,
course.
She did train with Sensei, They're like,
Not that, of course, I look great, but of course, he got the credit.
and her dad said, they're like, you're a great teacher. Look at her.
How many of those people did you correct?
Corrected them all. You know that. But yeah, that was fun.
You two had different experiences with O-sensei than some of the early masters, because you unfortunately were there as he progressed through his unfortunate illness. You met him when he came back from Vietnam, when he was real good, and then saw some changes. If you wouldn't mind, nicely, could you share some of those with us?
Yeah, so I think it would be a good progression to go into that, to tell you some of the stories where, way before that. And so one of the things we did was the continuation of always going to whatever was possible to see O-sensei and train at whatever seminars. He
was in Gainesville at this time. He was living in Gainesville.
Right, and even if we were in South Florida with Suhari, and I'm looking at Mark because he was one of the students there, we always did road trips, and have always been fortunate that everywhere we've gone, whether it's students we've trained with, student places, other schools we've gone to, other Cuong Nhu schools, as guests or whatever, it's always been an amazing experience because of the people. And so during this whole time, anytime O-sensei would give a seminar, we would travel to where he was, and all the school would come with us. And
yeah, we had some good road warriors.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so, you think about how, people say, oh, you started that school. Well, we may have started it, but it was the students who kept cultivating it and making sure we were on a path to become better instructors. And we're very forgiving when we made mistakes and kept it all going for us. And so, he and I would travel to different seminars with O-sensei. And whether it was, at times, when he was into perfecting judo,
he'd go through phases. Like, for a while we'd be doing just Wing Chun, and then for a while we'd just doing judo, and then for a while we'd just doing Aikido.
And he would just involve everybody, and he'd say, okay, so attack. And so, when O-sensei said, okay, hit me, my thought was, okay, here we go.
Yeah, you took your shot.
And yeah, you took your shot, and then you'd be flying up in the air, and boom. And he'd say, okay, try again. This time, I'm going to hit him. And you try again.
She was crazy. I don't know. She would, dive at him.
But so the relationship was anything he asked for, we were willing to do because it was for the benefit of Cuong Nhu and what Cuong Nhu had given to us as people.
But then we had some weird pockets because, starting in 86, we would go train with him, and we do seminars, and people were afraid of him because he was very demanding, and we would go to a seminar and nobody would be there but us. And I'm not speaking ill of anybody, but we did this a lot, and so we'd end up having these private seminars with him, and because if you go there, he would challenge you, like you say, oh, show me how you would teach this, and so. We guess that's why, because people just weren't showing up anymore. And the other thing people kind of were thrown by was that a lot of times he would get with you and he would really start to try to hit you with philosophy. And people like come on, Sensei, let's work out. And he'd be like, I taught you how to work out. You know how to work out. You're strong working out. He goes, I'm going to work out your mind. I'm going to make your mind sweat. And,
Wow, make your mind sweat. What an interesting term.
And a lot of people didn't like that. And so they kind of didn't come around like they should have.
And so we had the great fortune of going to a lot of black belt candidate seminars after we became black belts. And so it became the time when that was the starting point where he taught us how to teach. And you would have all these black belt candidates, and it was like a year or two we actually were part of the candidates working out. And then one day he's like, well, come, I want to show you. And he'd say, okay, you see that? And it's like, no. Look, you see this? They're not on the center line. You see? No, come on, you got to look.
And we'd be like,
and then the next time, you see?
slowly start seeing.
And then one day, oh, da da da, and he'd say, okay, now you run this, and he would walk around, and so it was like, oh,
eye. We realized then that there was a different eye there that we
and
didn't
so
have yet.
he taught us how to teach. And you know, the reason I'm saying this is because the way the relationship was is that if I made a mistake and I got called out on it by him, I was fine with that if somebody else would benefit from that mistake. And so, like even on a test I was giving one time, he said, okay, he stepped in and he said, okay, it should be here, not here. And I was like, okay, we're going to do that now. Because it was always this opportunity for growing and working out with him. So for the betterment of the style, which of course means the betterment of all of us as people.
But then we started noticing the change. And he used to say to us, he would say, I don't know what's going on. He goes, it's like I need more computer RAM. He goes, I have my memory. I need more RAM. He goes, and you joke about that.
And at first we thought it was like, oh, this is, because
For those of you who may not know, it was Alzheimer's.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, but at that time, we didn't know because he's running, the first time he said, well, he found running, and he went out and he ran a half marathon.
No, he started out, he ran 3 miles at work.
The story of that was he was at dinner, and Bao started track, and Sensei wanted him to work out in Cuong Nhu. He says, no, I'm in track. So Sensei says, okay, what's this track thing? And Bao went and ran around the block, and Sensei couldn't make it around the block. Less than 6 months later, he was doing 100-mile marathon.
That was a little quick time.
Because remember
Bao had a black belt test that he talked about running, and Sensei, I wasn't there, Sensei kind of didn't like that speech. But he did a lunchtime run with somebody. This is what he told us. Yeah. And he loved it. So he did it again. And next thing you know, he's talking about, he's going to do a 5K. And then he's going to do a half marathon. And he's going to do a marathon. And he's going to do back-to-back marathons. And he was, just running everywhere. In fact, one time he did the Miami Marathon. I had the club in Hollywood, Presidential. And Sensei was coming down to give a seminar.
And he had fallen. And so when he came to do the seminar,
he was bleeding.
His face was all scraped up.
And everybody was like, holy shit, look at him.
Bad.
That's the master. Bleeding from the head. So he's like, let's work out.
He did a marathon, if I recall, Pikes Peak at altitude for 100 miles.
I don't think Pike Peak is a 100-mile run.
The marathon was a 100-mile marathon. Yeah. And he was not the fastest, but he finished every one.
And a lot of times he went longer because he got lost. He said, I'm a city person. And so that's when a lot of people were so awesome, they would run parts of it with him. So he would be able, and then he got his buckle because he ran 100 miles within the time, because sometimes he would run more than 100 miles, not make it in the time required, so we didn't get the buckle.
But then he came up with this new way of training, because he said ultra marathoners, they just train and they ruin their knees. So he talked about how he was creating a moving meditation, and he would only train like 15, 20 miles a week. And he said once you get into the zone, so he wanted to prove his theory of moving meditation. So he would only train 15, 20 miles a week and then run 100 miles. And a lot of people were interested in this. And so he started working with the Florida Runners Club that wasn't really like ranked or anything. And next thing you know, I think they ranked the top 5 very quickly, because he was teaching them all how to do what he called moving meditation. So he was proving this theory that you don't need to run 1,000,000 miles to 100 miles. You just needed to find how to set your mind free. And so we used to run with him, and he would run with him, and he'd go, let's talk philosophy. So he'd be running along, and we were on this path he was familiar with. He would get in front of you, and he'd go, watch my back. And he would run backwards in front of you.
And so, you try to run a little faster to keep up. And so when you're going to know the vomit story?
Yeah.
Okay.
At some point, Elizabeth, everybody has asked me to ask you to tell a Robert story. So whenever
I've
ready,
got a list.
That's...
Well, we were running...
Nobody was asked to tell an Elizabeth story. Everybody wants a Robert story.
Well, he told me that, he said, okay, now we have, almost to the finish line. I want you to sprint to the finish. Run as hard as you can. I'm like, yes. So I take off, I'm probably 20, whatever, less than 30 years old. And I'm running as hard as I can. And at one point, I realized he's like right off my tail, like running like nothing. You know, he was very smooth in his running. He was very quiet. He goes, "You make a lot of noise when you run, Robert, first." And I get to the finish line, and I mean, I was dying, and I just projectile vomit. That just, he's like, "Oh, projectile vomiting. Oh, that's, you'll get your, oh, yeah." And he was like going crazy about it. He loved the fact that I was projectile vomiting everywhere because I had gone to the limit. I'd given my all. And I was like, Jesus, Sensei, really?
And so here we have, you know, them running incorporated. You could run. You know, when he would do his marathons, we'd go swim to see, you know, of course, maybe a mile, half mile. But it was very inspiring. And so when he had people run different, for different ranks, you'd have to run different mileages. What he would do is, you know, you'd go out and celebrate on a Saturday night. You get promoted on a Sunday. But Sunday morning was the run. And so for the first couple years, he would run with all the candidates, and we would run too.
Yeah.
And then a year or two goes by, and then
I don't know how long the time was, but it was happening.
and then O-Sensei said, "Okay, so Elizabeth and Robert, you run with the
Right
candidates."
at the end of the black belt test, he's like, "Okay, you know, we're not on the black belt test." He goes, "Okay, you two take a morning in the morning." We're like,
Oh, okay.
"No,
And so,
I,
you know,
I wasn't okay, but I got you."
so, and if you think about it, after celebrating after a black belt test, it could be a little rough in the morning.
But the guys that we were running with thought we were hardcore. They're like, "Oh my God, Elizabeth."
But what would have to happen is you have to run 9-minute miles. And for black belt, how was it, a mile or two?
No, it was at least two. It was at least two.
Okay.
It wasn't a lot. But,
No.
but
And
they
then,
were still worried about it.
right, and then you had to do philosophy. So, you know,
She made a deal with him.
if we can run 9-minute miles, or we can go a very, very slow pace
Jog
and talk
philosophy.
philosophy. Well, guess what?
Well, everybody wanted to talk philosophy. But
So
she,
we did.
But she told O-Sensei that. He was okay
Yep,
with
so
it.
we did it, and then O-Sensei said, "How did everyone do?" And I said, "Well, we opted to go a little slower so we could philosophize." And he, "Oh, very good, philosophy."
And then came the great day.
Yeah. So more time passes, and the sensei says, "Okay, you're gonna go running, and Elizabeth, you're gonna take the group." And I'm like, "What?" And I look at him, I'm like, "Well, you're coming, aren't you?" He's like, "Psh, no, I'm sleeping in."
I went.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, maybe I didn't.
You didn't.
Yeah, that was a great day.
So you had asked for some Robert stories. You had also asked some of the lessons we learned, and
You're not going to talk about the hangover.
no, I'll skip that one. But
Okay.
you know, so
You can tell the hangover if you want.
there's kind of a
We're
theme.
hearing the hangover story now.
So when Robert was going to take his Shodan test, you know, for the Shodan test, you had to get CPR, teach for so long, no new one.
But we already teaching. I mean,
Right, but
I was a head instructor
He
in
didn't
school
have a
before my
CPR.
black belt test.
so Sensei said, "Okay, you can't have your Shodan, go get your CPR." 3 months later, "It's okay, Robert, ready to go? You have your CPR?"
Robert or Robert first?
It was always Robert first.
Do you
Robert
have-
first. You have your CPR?
No. And so now we're at what, 6 months?
He would like growl.
At the 9-month mark,
Robert first. You have your CPR?
but at the 9-month mark, or was it a year?
There's a year.
It was one of them. He turned and looked at me and he said, "You get him his CPR." And I went, "Okay." Next Saturday, we were in the CPR class.
And then we get in the class, and they canceled it. The guy had signed up too many people, and they couldn't do that many people. And we're like, "Oh, this isn't happening." So everyone left. We just hung out.
And they gave us a
And
CPR.
after everyone left, he goes, "Okay, we can do this."
So I have to admit I was a little agitated. And there were a couple more times where Robert would do something, and then O-Sensei would look at me and say, "What's going on?" And then one of the greatest lessons was for that is, you know, we are our friends and our loved ones. We were responsible for them, right? Their behavior reflects on us. It's up to us to help guide them on the path. And that was a good lesson because for me it was always like, okay, everybody should be very independent, follow their path. I'll be supportive, but then there's at some point you have to look at it and say, but is it the right path? Maybe they need a little guidance.
I didn't build the doghouse, but I was definitely the chief occupant.
What's your favorite Cuong Nhu? If you had to write a Cuong Nhu philosophy, or say to somebody, well, there's a whole bunch, but you need to just know one, which would you pick?
That's easy. You must know that to understand the 3 O's. Not
I knew you would pick that because
Now-
that's my favorite as well.
But not open mind, open heart, open arms. If you talked philosophy with O-sensei, and you got into it with him, and disagreed with him or went back and forth with him, he taught you a different level of the 3 O's.
Mm-hmm.
It's known in the manual as the 3 O's, yin yang interpersonal strategies. And that is the 3 O's. For instance, what's the core of open heart? The core. It's perception and reception. What's the core of open arms? Energy and courage. What's the core of open mind? Intelligence. When you heard him talk about that, the 3 O's became multidimensional, like a spiral.
Elizabeth, yours?
Definitely 3 O's is my favorite because it encompasses who we are.
It's where all the other ones are built off of.
But you said if I would write one,
Yeah.
We have written ones.
the 5 truths.
We both
That
have
was the
one.
one.
The 5 truths?
She wrote the
The
5
5
truths.
truths.
Yeah.
In the manual, it's true friendship, true love, true happiness, true peace, true freedom.
Beautiful.
But it was inspired by O-sensei and all the teachings and all the classes. That was where it came from.
And then we got to see a lot of them created. He went through this time period, year-wise, I guess maybe early 90s. O-sensei all of a sudden just became just prolific, just philosophies were just flowing out of him. It was almost like he felt the Alzheimer's coming because he had to get everything out of his head, and it was overwhelming for a while. We'd go to his house and sit down at his dining room table, and he would say, "Oh, get the dictionary." And he might say, "Give me V words," or he'd pick a letter, and we'd go through the dictionary, and he would be formulating this philosophy. And it was
Or
really
you'd be
cool.
at a black belt candidate seminar, and it would just organically
He just,
have,
oh.
based on what was happening there, he came up with the 5 ups.
Or a student would say something. Like
That's a great story, the 5 ups.
5 Ups was a wild day.
Would you share it with us?
So, and every black belt candidate seminar, the first day you would do katas, the second day you would in self-defense,
And he
applications,
slept over in the dojo.
and then the second day it was all about weapons. And so, but at the end of that, we would end at noon, and then O-sensei would want to get to know each of the candidates. So,
But let's put a little point in there. When O-sensei wanted to have snacks at a seminar, he would bring Coca-Cola and bananas. Coca-Cola and bananas.
okay, you're going again with the sugar and the bananas for the.
Anyways, go on.
So here we circled up, and then we were standing beside the sensei, and the students are each going through, this is who I am,
2 minute.
this is where I'm
2-minute
from, yeah,
synopsis.
2 to 3 minutes, this is where I'm from, this is what I hope to do as a black belt, because he wanted to get to know his black belts,
He
his future black belts.
truly cared about who you were.
And so, so this was just one of the candidate seminars. Some of the candidate seminars, like on a Saturday night, they would go till 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and then you got up and started again at 9 a.m. till noon to 2 o'clock. So anyway, it comes to this one student, and this one student starts talking about how in the past, how awesome his kick was. It's a little lower, and he started
He was
really...
definitely enamored with himself.
Right, and he put his roundhouse kick up, and he starts looking at it and going, and my roundhouse kick used to be this high, and he's just like...
I mean, we're all like...
No, seriously,
Just
like
fall asleep.
literally. And so,
And it just kept going. I mean, we can't exaggerate this. You can't make this up.
And so then what happened?
so let's say like 20 minutes go by, and,
Literally, it's 20 minutes. The guy's still talking.
and then all of a sudden,
All of a sudden,
sensei's
The
gone.
sensei's gone.
And
I-
we're like,
And I'm looking over at Elizabeth, I'm like, what just happened?
but what was interesting is the student kept
The guy didn't
talking.
miss a beat.
Never noticed.
And
Or if he noticed, didn't matter.
and later we talked about it because I was sitting there thinking to myself, oh, he wants us to do something.
Yeah, we had thought the same thing, and it was like, should we? Should
What
we
are we
not?
supposed to do? And while we're trying to figure that out, he's back. And we're like, and he goes, oh, I went out to the parking lot and and I made up new philosophy on the spot. Yeah, I call it the 5 ups. And he says, the first up is, shut up. And,
And he said it very loud and very direct.
We never heard a philosophy like that, so we were like, ooh. And he goes, it's powerful. Sometimes people just need to slam the door. We're like, okay. And then the guy was like he was playing a role because he played into it perfect. Because he looked at Sensei, and Sensei goes, you're talking and talking and talking, and people are falling asleep, their eyes are glassing over, and you know nothing because you're totally wrapped up in yourself. And and he's, Sensei could be what you would call wrathful at times. He could lay it on you. So he's laying it on this dude, and while he's doing it, he goes, don't just shut up and put your voice away. And you can see the guy go like, what? And he goes, no. And the guy's like, but. And the guy, now beat up that feeling, beat it up. You just want to talk, don't you? You just want to talk. Beat it up. He goes, yes. And the guy just kept trying to, he said, put it up on the highest shelf. So you have to get a ladder to get your voice. It's way up there. And the guy's just like freaking out. But then he's like, okay, just telling them, he's like talking him through it. And then he goes like, you feel it? Yes. You feel it now. Yes. Now you can listen. Keep it up. Now you can listen. Now live up to that. Live up to a new life. Learn to listen. And that was the 5 ups.
The 5 ups will always have a new meaning for anybody who watches this video.
But now we've renamed the 5 ups.
To?
5 ups of social media. Those of y'all out there on Facebook, shut up. Start listening. Pay attention to things.
One more. Cuong Nhu Reflections. Robert?
You mean Cuong Nhu Toi?
Oh.
As best as I could come up with that.
So,
Who knows what that word is actually?
so one of the introductions.
Because you saw an evolution of the style.
We
in
both
his
did.
later
We
years.
both did it on
Both
separate.
of you did.
For me, I was walking down the hallway of his house.
No, the first time was at the apartment when his last seminar was at our house.
Oh, the apartment, that's right.
So one of the last seminars that O-sensei had.
The last seminar he ever did was in Burlington.
Right, and so
He was staying in our
Robert,
house.
Heidi was there, Don Mafuji was there, and so we were going up to the Burlington. Always had a
Camp Budo.
Camp Budo, and so one of the things that we had to do that Tu had told us or Quinn had told us was put a sign that when O-sensei would wake up in the
He'd see
room he
where he
was
was.
sleeping in, say you're at Elizabeth and Roberts, just so he had that comfort.
But then he hands these pills to Elizabeth, and he says, you have to remind me to take these pills. And he goes, don't you think that's funny that
Someone with a memory problem has to remind you,
to remind me
them to take
to
some
take my
memory
pills.
pills.
Then he goes, ha, 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 ha.
So anyway, after Camp Budo, it was either the day before or the day after.
It was after, I think. Yeah, it was after.
We're in our living room, and he starts talking in Cuong Nhu Toi, which is like this joint, very painful rap.
The next evolution of Cuong Nhu.
Yeah. And he's like flying, and he's like doing it to all of us. And at one point, he's like, "Okay, now let's practice flying back fists." And this is like midnight.
We're breaking
He
stuff
goes
in the
flying,
apartment.
and the lamps are going here and there, and
He's like, oh.
he's like telling Heidi, "Do it again."
He's totally getting off like a kid, right? I mean, like, just
And that reminds me of the weapons story.
the weapon story. But then we went to his house when he was really into the old timers now.
But before we go there, you
I
want
was
to
doing
say
Cuong Nhu
that?
Toi.
Yeah.
And I'm going down the hallway.
You're on your own, guys.
And I'm going down the hallway, and I see him coming at me, and he goes, Wabba fuss. Let me show you the next evolution of Cuong Nhu Toi. So he puts his hand out. So, you grab a hand like you always do. And I grab his wrist, and he locks me. And I mean, locked me. I went down to my knees.
He was a very powerful man.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like tapping. And for one moment, because, all times I was like, where does this go? And then, boom, he just released. And then she had the same thing.
Yeah, so one time we went up there, and the reason we went to visit him was we had read somewhere that if you have somebody who's got an ailment, it's something to give some relief to the family, you go stay and take care of them. And when we had mentioned that to Tu, she said, no, you just come and spend time with him. And so we went this one time, and I was sitting with him, and you know, at this point, he was like, he would sit
Real
very
stiff.
still. And then, so I would do,
She's always
I do new one, right? And he would turn his head and go, more fluidity.
Out of nowhere.
And
like,
go back.
yeah,
And
just
I
out
do
of
it
nowhere.
again. So then finally, I pull him off the couch. And I go, Sensei, whoom, and he goes, and I'm like, and for that brief moment, I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, is he gonna kill me? And then I went, oh no, this is so Sensei, no problem. And he lets go. And so we kind of did it for a while. And so the weapons, the throwing of the weapons, so I'm getting ready.
I already got my knee done. She was doing hers now. We went up to work out with him in private.
Right, and so
And
we're in.
8 katas we got to do.
Right, and so we're in the park off of 8th Street in
Yeah.
Gainesville. And so I'm getting ready to, I'm showing him a kata
And
or
he's sick
two.
of them.
And he's like, you're fine.
I've seen them already.
Let's throw some weapons. And
He
we're
goes-
like, awesome.
Yeah, he's like, let me show you how to weapons.
So he takes the tambos and he's like, and then
No. Before the tambos was the side.
That's true, that's
The
true.
side.
So I was doing sai, and
No, yeah, and he goes, oh, give me the side.
so we had this pair of sais.
He's trying to throw the side
And he's
into
like,
the ground.
here's how you do it. You whip your hand.
And he wouldn't stick.
Boom, and it would fall.
Wouldn't
Whip your
stick.
hand, and it would fall. And he's like, here, you try it. And I go,
Boom, and it sticks. And he goes, oh, how'd you do that?
and he said, let's throw some tambos. And we're like, all right. So there's all these trees, and you know, every
Running
now
around throwing tambos
yeah,
at
and he's like,
trees.
okay, so here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna throw one tambo, hit the tree. So you throw, and he's like, yes.
I
And
mean, no, he was like a kid. He was like 5.
Jumping up
He'd
and
be-
down.
Yeah, you'd hit the tree, you'd be like, oh!
And then he's like, okay, now 2. And I want you to throw 1, 2,
2 at once,
and land like this. And you're like,
Stack
dunk,
them on
dunk.
top of each other.
And then he was all of a
And
sudden,
then we
stop.
realized we were about to kill somebody.
And he's like, stop.
He's like, run
Let
her.
the run. And then,
Okay,
go.
go!
And then he's like, okay, now take 2. Boom. And so,
It's crazy.
and it was awesome. It was so much fun. And so when we moved up to North Carolina, we would go out, actually, we're here at NC State,
With
the goalpost,
goalposts.
and everyone would be like, thunk, thunk. And so we'd go play at the soccer field where the goalposts where we would
Yeah.
throw the weapons. And there were a couple training camps. I actually taught this at the training camp as a session when I realized the university might not like everyone throwing weapons at their walls outside.
Yeah.
You decide who goes first. Describe him in one sentence if you had to tell somebody who never knew him before. This was not a planned question. And it'll be the last one.
Man who truly believed in humanity.
Elizabeth?
Wow. Someone who could bring people together and teach us how to become the best we can, put us on a path that we could become the best we can become, and still realize that the most important thing in the world was world peace.
You've got 2 former students sitting here who feel that way about you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
So one of the things that we'd like to say is thank you both for this. You know, it's really great to have someone who would take the time to and the effort to bring people together so that we could all have share these memories, and then you know, for us, has always been such an important part of our life. We found each other through Cuong Nhu. We found friends that we never would have had, just like everybody else. But how lucky are we that we stepped into whatever dojo we stepped into, to not only meet someone who was so amazing, but also the family who kept it going. And, you know, and Grandmaster Quinn keeping us on this path of evolution from where his father sparked us to just going to wherever infinity will take us. And it shows us the power of one person, that we can all find no matter where we are on the spectrum of personalities, we're still like family. That's pretty phenomenal.
This was special because the 2 of you were special. Thank you.